Before I tell you what happened that night, here's the short version that hooked even me when I replayed it later. My son's friend knocked on my door after everyone had gone home, his voice trembling like a string pulled too tight, and he asked me for permission to tell the truth. What he said turned an ordinary evening into a turning point for all of us. "Where are you watching from? Tell me your city. I love seeing the places that gather around these stories. And if you enjoy stories that feel true to life, please subscribe to the channel and tap like so others can find us too." Now, let me begin. The house had that familiar after-company quiet, the kind where cups are still drying in the rack, and the air smells faintly of roasted peppers and lemon dish soap. My feet were grateful for the silence, and the ticking clock over the hallway console sounded oddly proud of itself, steady as a metronome measuring out my evening. I had just folded the last dish towel when the doorbell rang. One short ring, a pause, then another, as if the person on the other side was deciding whether to change their mind. I opened the door to find Ethan standing on the porch. He was my son's friend from high school, and still one of the regular faces at our table, even now that they were in their 20s. He had always been the thoughtful one, the kid who took his shoes off without being asked and complimented the soup, even if it was just out of a can. Tonight his hair was damp from the misty air, and he held the strap of his backpack like it might carry the one sentence he wasn't ready to say. "Mrs. Hart," he began, then corrected himself with a small, nervous smile. "Maya. Do you have a minute?" The porch light drew a pale circle around his shoulders. Behind him, the street glowed with a few late windows and the sliver of a moon. I felt the hush of the neighborhood resting after a long day. I glanced at the living room, pillows slightly crooked, the game controller, a stray napkin tucked into the couch seam, and stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "If there's something to talk about, let's talk. Only if you're comfortable." He nodded, that careful nod people give when they need the ground to stop moving under their feet. I watched him toe off his sneakers and set them parallel on the mat, a small, respectful ritual he learned from my son, who learned it from me. We walked to the kitchen, where the under-cabinet lights gave everything a soft, even glow. I poured tea for both of us, something mild and steadying, and set the mugs on the table like anchor stones. He didn't sit right away. He stood at the back of the chair, fingers resting on the wood, his gaze on the steam moving up in smooth, ghostly ribbons. "I need to ask for something before I start," he said. "Your permission. I want to tell you the truth about tonight, and maybe about before tonight. But I only want to say it if you're willing to hear it, and if it stays respectful. I don't want to cause trouble. He stopped and swallowed. "I need to say it out loud." I took a breath, the kind you take when you're about to cross a dark room, cut by that thin line of light under the door. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'm here. You have my permission to say what you need to say, and we'll take it one step at a time. No judgment, just honesty." He exhaled, shoulders loosening as if the words themselves were a weight he'd been carrying between his shoulder blades. He sank into the chair, and I sat opposite him, the table a narrow river of wood between us. "After everyone left," he said, "your son he was upset. Not angry. Just quiet in that way he gets when he's already made a decision and he's worried about disappointing you." Ethan looked down at his hands. "He told me he wants to stop pretending he's okay in his program, that he's been going to classes, but only in the body. He said he doesn't want to build a life that looks right but feels wrong. And he asked me to tell you because he couldn't find the words. I said no at first. It's not my place. But he pressed my shoulder and said, 'You say things in a way she understands.'" The kettle clicked against its base as the leftover heat shifted. I held my mug and felt the warmth through the ceramic, steadying my pulse. My son, the boy who used to set up elaborate domino runs on the rug, who learned to cook by burning pancakes 3 Sundays in a row, had always been more quiet than stubborn. He did not like conflict. He loved making everyone else comfortable. And he was right. Ethan did say things with a calm I often trusted. "Did he ask you to come back tonight?" I asked. "No, he told me not to. He said he'd do it tomorrow." Ethan lifted his eyes, and I could see a tremor of conflict there. But I walked to the bus stop, and I just stood there. You know how the intersection looks from outside your fence? The stop sign, the stretch of dark street. I stood under that streetlight and thought about how many times he's been there for me. When my dad left, when we lost our apartment, when I had that panic attack before exams, he was the one who showed up with groceries and a stupid joke. And I thought, if the truth needs saying, maybe it needs to be said to the person who won't run away from it. I didn't want to be a messenger, but I wanted to be brave. He paused and watched me, measuring the space between us, checking if I was with him. I nodded. "Thank you for asking permission," I said, "and thank you for being careful. Tell me what you heard, in your words." He rubbed his thumb over the rim of his mug. "He doesn't hate it," he said. It's not a life for him. He's been forcing himself to continue because he thinks he's supposed to. He keeps a running list of people he doesn't want to disappoint, and your name is at the top. But he lights up when he talks about the community studio, the woodshop classes on Saturdays. He's been volunteering there, fixing wobbly tables, repairing the step stools. He told me he finishes a piece of wood, runs his hand over it, and it finally feels like the inside of his head is quiet. Ethan looked up. He wants to switch paths. He wants to tell you that he needs your blessing, or at least your ear. The word blessing touched something inside me I didn't know was tender. Parenthood, for me, had always been a slow, beautiful negotiation between hopes and realities. I thought of the way my son once asked, at age 8, if trees got tired of holding up the sky. I thought of the way he cradled a cracked bowl I was ready to throw away and spent an hour mending it, proud of the fine golden seam he had made with resin and patience. People told him it was just a phase, the fixing. But phases often leave fingerprints on a life. Sometimes they are prefaces. Why did that shock you? I asked, realizing even as the question left my mouth that shock wasn't the only thing I felt. Relief was braided into it, and fear, and love wide as the room. Ethan reddened slightly. "That's not the part that shocked me," he said. "I thought you should know about the program because it's big. But the other thing, the thing that brought me back, was more personal. And I won't say it unless you want to hear it. It involves me." He took a breath and steadied himself. "I'd like to tell you what I sent to him when he asked me to speak for him. But only if you're okay with that." I looked past him for a moment to the hallway mirror where the porch light cast a faint halo around the frame. The house held its breath. A car passed, tires whispering on wet pavement. I felt the old habit rise in me, the impulse to protect, to control, to steer the ship so no one got hurt. But control is not the same as care, and secrecy has never been a safe harbor. "You have my permission," I said. "If the truth is coming into this house tonight, let it come with kindness and clarity. We'll decide what to do with it together." He nodded, grateful, and straightened like a sailor sighting land. "I told him I owed you the truth about me too," he said. "That I've been carrying something I didn't want to put on your doorstep. I told him I'm the reason he kept showing up to classes this semester. I kept asking him to because..." He stopped and pinched the bridge of his nose, as if to catch the trickle of emotion before it fell. because I wanted him nearby, not to control him, not even to help me, just because being near your family, your dinners, your holidays, your ordinary kindness made my own life feel steadier. And I realized that's not fair to him. It's not fair to you either if I don't say it out loud. I've leaned on this house like it was a railing, and I never asked if the railing could hold me. My heart tugged, not with anger, but with the strange, aching tenderness of understanding. I saw it then, the way Ethan always volunteered to carry the heavy dish, to sweep the kitchen, to set the extra chair. The way he lingered on the porch after goodbyes, not because he had something to say, but because he wasn't ready to step back into the draft of his own life. There was humility in his confession and a clear line of respect running through it. He hadn't asked for anything I wasn't willing to give. He'd simply been afraid to name what it cost him to receive it. Railing or not, I said softly, people need something to steady themselves with. We all do. But it matters that you know it, and that you ask. I folded my hands around the warm cup. Thank you for telling me. Tell me what you need now, not what you think I can give easily, what you truly need. It surprised him, that question. I could tell by the way his shoulders unhitched and his eyes moved to the corner of the table like he was reading a note left there for him. He let a few seconds pass, honoring the silence, and then said, I need you to know that if he changes paths, I'll help him tell you. I'll stand beside him, not in front of him. I won't hide behind your kindness anymore. And this is the hardest part. I need your permission to keep coming around, but differently. Not as a shadow. As a guest who knows when to go home. I don't want to lose this house's gentle gravity, but I don't want to take it for granted either. I felt the edges of my fear soften. This was not a boy making excuses. This was a young man measuring his own weight and asking where to place it. In that moment I remembered my own younger self, the years after my marriage ended, when I leaned on Mrs. Coman down the block with her cinnamon bread and encyclopedic knowledge of neighborhood goings-on. I had stood in her kitchen, too, at odd hours, and she never once made me feel like a burden. She used to say, borrow my steadiness until yours returns. Maybe what we give each other at our best is not solutions, but steadiness. You can keep coming, I said. On one condition. We agreed to speak plainly. If I ever feel the railing wobble, I'll say so. If you feel it, you'll say so. And with my son, we'll let him set the pace of his own words. I won't decide for him tonight. Ethan's relief was quiet but visible, like the way a tight knot loosens under warm water. He nodded, eyes shining a little, and took a sip of his tea. The steam fogged the air between us for a second, and then cleared. He glanced toward the hallway, where my son's door was closed, a thin blade of light at the threshold telling me he was still awake. Tomorrow, then, Ethan said, I'll come back when he's ready. With your permission. With my permission, I agreed. And with respect. He stood and slipped his shoes back on. At the door he paused, the porch light outlining him again. He turned, not to add more, but to acknowledge the fragile, sturdy thing we had just built. A conversation, honest and aloud. Thank you, he said, for letting the truth in. When he left, the house felt different. Not heavier, not lighter. Just real, as if someone had opened a window and the night air had brought in a more accurate temperature. I rinsed the mugs and set them to dry. In the mirror, I saw my own face, older than I sometimes felt, younger than I sometimes feared, settle into an expression I recognized from my grandmother, a look of calm that shows up when you've chosen to listen instead of control. I moved quietly down the hall and stopped outside my son's door. I knocked once, gently. not to press him, only to let him know the house was awake with care, that the door he needed to open tomorrow would not be locked tonight. The clock kept time. The street went on being a street. The world didn't tilt, but something inside our little household had shifted toward honesty, and that, I knew, is how big changes begin, one careful permission at a time. The next morning carried a stillness that felt heavier than usual. I woke up early, the kind of early when the world is tinted a faint gray, and the birds haven't yet begun their chatter. As I padded into the kitchen, the memory of Ethan's words echoed in my mind. My son's voice hadn't been the one to tell me the truth, but his friend's careful honesty had left me both relieved and unsettled. The kettle hissed to life, and I poured myself a cup of tea, sitting at the table where the conversation had unfolded just hours earlier. The mugs were washed, the counter cleared, yet the air still carried the weight of confession. I knew my son would wake soon. I knew he would shuffle into the kitchen with his usual sleepy look, hoping the world hadn't changed overnight. And part of me wanted to protect him, to act as if Ethan had never come back after leaving for the bus stop. But another part of me, stronger, steadier, knew that ignoring it would only push him deeper into silence. I had to let him know that the truth had already found its way to me. When he finally emerged, rubbing his eyes and tugging at his hoodie, I studied his face. He avoided my gaze, reaching for the cereal box like he always did. I realized in that moment how much practice he had in keeping things hidden, in covering his discomfort with everyday gestures. My chest tightened, not in anger, but in a mother's ache. "I spoke with Ethan last night," I said quietly. My words made him pause, the cereal spoon halfway to the bowl. His shoulders stiffened, and the air between us thickened with unspoken fear. He set the spoon down, finally looking at me. "He wasn't supposed to." "I know," I interrupted gently. "He told me you asked him not to. But he also said you asked him to find the words you couldn't." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "You don't have to be afraid of me, not with this." His face softened, but his lips trembled as though each word was weighing him down. "Mom, I didn't want you to think I was giving up. I didn't want to disappoint you." The room felt like it held its breath. I let the silence sit for a moment before speaking. "Do you know what disappoints me more than anything?" I asked. "When you don't trust me with your heart. When you believe I'd rather see you pretending than see you happy." His eyes brimmed with something I hadn't seen in him for a while, relief mingled with vulnerability. He wiped at his face, quickly, embarrassed, but the dam had cracked. "I can't keep doing this, Mom. I don't hate the program, but it feels like I'm living someone else's life. Every day I walk into those halls, I feel like I'm wearing clothes that don't fit me. But when I'm at the workshop, fixing, building, creating, I breathe differently. I feel like myself." Hearing his voice steady as he spoke, I thought back to the countless times he had mended small things around the house. The kitchen chair that stopped wobbling after he tinkered with it. The cracked garden bench that he sanded smooth until it shone like new. I realized then that this wasn't a sudden decision. It had been written in his hands, in his patience, in the quiet joy he found in bringing order back to broken things. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You don't need my permission to follow your path," I said softly. "But if you want it, you have it. I'd rather you stumble on your own road than walk straight on a road that isn't yours." For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he let out a genuine laugh, short, shaky, but real. It filled the kitchen like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. "I thought you'd be angry," he admitted. "I was shocked," I replied honestly. "But anger? No, I only wish you'd trusted me sooner." He nodded, and for the first time that morning, he seemed lighter. He spooned cereal into his mouth, not as a distraction, but with the ease of someone who no longer carried a secret. The day unfolded quietly after that. He spent the afternoon in his room, sketching designs and making notes, while I went about tidying the house. Yet every sound he made, every movement, felt like a new rhythm, freer, more honest. That evening, Ethan returned. He knocked politely, just as he had the night before, and when I opened the door, he carried an anxious smile. My son joined us in the living room, his eyes clearer than I had seen in a long time. Together, the three of us sat, and I realized we were about to step into a different kind of conversation, not one built on fear or secrets, but on courage and truth. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew one thing with certainty. Sometimes the hardest knocks on the door are the ones that let the light in. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the lamp by the window, the kind of light that makes everything feel gentler, less sharp. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, his backpack at his feet, shifting his weight as if he were still deciding whether he belonged in that moment. My son leaned back, arms crossed, but not in defiance, more in a way that showed he was bracing himself for what was to come. I sat between them, not as a judge, but as a bridge. The silence stretched, and I could almost hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, my son spoke. "I told you I'd handle it, Ethan. You weren't supposed to come back." His voice wasn't angry, but it carried the tension of someone who wanted to own his story. Ethan lowered his gaze. "I know, and I'm sorry. But I couldn't stand the thought of you carrying it alone another night. You've done that for me too many times, and I couldn't do it to you." That admission seemed to soften something in my son. His shoulders lowered, his expression loosened. He didn't answer right away, but the silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was full of understanding, like a long pause in a song you know will continue. I turned to my son. "You told me this morning about how the program feels and how the workshop gives you peace. That honesty, it's the beginning of a new chapter for you." And Ethan told me something else last night, something about how much this house, this family, has meant to him. It was said with respect, and I think it matters that we talk about that too. My son looked at Ethan, surprise flickering across his face. "You told her?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I had to. I leaned on you and on your family, more than I should have without saying it. It wasn't fair to keep that unspoken. I didn't want to pretend anymore, not with you, not with her." For a long moment, my son just studied him. Then he sighed, shaking his head with a half-smile. "You've always been bad at pretending anyway." That small laugh between them felt like a window opening. The heaviness lifted, replaced with the quiet comfort of two young men who had carried each other through harder days than I ever knew. I spoke carefully, choosing words that would honor both of them. "You're both learning something important, about honesty, about respect, about knowing when to lean and when to stand. That's not weakness. That's how people grow." My son leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom, I was afraid you'd see me as a quitter. I wanted to live up to everything you've sacrificed. But I'm realizing now, it's not about living up to your dreams. It's about living honestly. Ethan helped me see that." I reached out and placed a hand on his back, feeling the quiet strength there. "I never wanted you to carry my sacrifices as a burden. They were never meant to chain you. They were meant to give you choices." Ethan's eyes grew bright, and he added softly, "And you're not a quitter. You're just brave enough to admit when something isn't right. That's harder than finishing something that doesn't fit." The words hung in the air, gentle but powerful. My son didn't reply, but he gave a small nod, the kind that said he had heard it deeply, even if he couldn't yet put his feelings into words. The night wound down with no grand declarations, just the quiet comfort of three people sharing space honestly. Ethan eventually stood, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "Thank you," he said at the door, not just to me, but to both of us. My son clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that said more than words could. When the door closed and the house returned to its usual stillness, I felt a sense of quiet pride, not just in my son, but in the way we had faced the truth together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was real. And sometimes that's the greatest gift we can give one another, the courage to live without pretending. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I thought about how quickly life can shift. One unexpected knock, one moment of courage, and the course of a family can begin to change. And in that thought, I found peace. The days that followed felt different, as though the air in the house had shifted into something clearer, lighter. My son moved with a new kind of energy, not rushed, not frantic, but purposeful. He spent more hours at the community workshop, returning home with sawdust on his sleeves and a calm smile I hadn't seen in years. He would sit at the kitchen table sketching designs, his pencil tapping the page as if he were finally in rhythm with his own heartbeat. I watched him carefully, not as a mother waiting to correct, but as one learning to trust her child's choices. There were still moments of doubt, of course, little flashes where I wondered if he'd regret leaving his program, if the world would be kind to someone who dared to follow an unconventional path. But each time I saw his eyes light up as he spoke about the work he was doing, those doubts softened into something gentler, faith. Ethan, too, found his place in this new chapter. He no longer hovered at the edges of our evenings, afraid to overstay his welcome. Instead, he came openly, sometimes to help with dinner, sometimes just to share a story from his day. He carried himself differently now, less weighed down by unspoken gratitude, more balanced in the way he gave and received. And when he laughed with my son, I could see the strength of a friendship built on more than shared history. It was built on truth. One evening, as autumn settled in and the air turned crisp, we sat outside on the porch with mugs of tea, the three of us wrapped in sweaters. The street was quiet, leaves scattered across the pavement, and the world seemed to pause just for us. My son leaned back in his chair, looking up at the darkening sky. "Mom," he said, "I didn't realize how much I was holding back until it all came out. I thought I was protecting you by pretending. But now I see. Honesty protects us better than silence ever could." His words touched something deep in me. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake when he was younger, worrying over fevers or scraped knees, and how often I had believed my job was to shield him from every pain. But now I realized the most powerful shield I could give him was permission to be himself, to be honest, to grow without fear of letting me down. I placed my hand over his. "You've given me a gift too," I told him. The reminder that love isn't about controlling the story. It's about walking alongside you, even when the road curves in directions I didn't expect. Ethan, quiet until then, spoke softly. "You've both taught me something as well. That home isn't always the place you're born into. It can be the place where honesty is welcomed, where kindness is steady. I'll never forget that." The porch light glowed above us, casting a golden halo over our little circle. For a long time, none of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full of trust, of peace, of the knowledge that we had faced something hard and come through together. Later that night, as I tidied up before bed, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face carried the lines of years lived, but also a softness I hadn't noticed before. I thought about how one unexpected knock on the door had opened more than just an evening's conversation. It had opened a new season of truth in our lives. And as I turned out the lights, I knew this much with certainty. Life will always bring surprises, some harder than others. But when we meet them with honesty, respect, and love, even the most unexpected moments can become the ones that shape us for the better. That night, I went to bed with a calm heart, grateful for the courage it took from all of us to let the truth in, and for the way it had already begun to change everything.